Have you ever noticed how sadness sometimes feels safer than joy? Like you're drifting along, trying to hold on to happiness, trying to be positive, and yet, without warning, it feels easier to sink back into sorrow. I've been there too. And I think many of us have. We tell ourselves it's just a mood, just a phase. But deep down, we know there's something else happening, something in our minds pulling us back. Because sometimes, sadness feels safer than happiness. And today, I want to explore why. Our brains are strange things. They aren't designed to make us happy. They're designed to keep us alive. And survival for the mind often means clinging to what feels familiar. So if sadness has been a part of our lives for a long time, if it's the background music we grew up with, the mind begins to treat it like home, even if that home is cold, even if that home is filled with shadows. Think about it. Joy feels unpredictable. It comes in flashes like sunlight breaking through the clouds, but sadness feels steady, constant, reliable in its own dark way. And there's a strange comfort in that, because when we already know the pain, we don't have to fear it anymore. We know how it feels. We know how to carry it. And so the mind whispers, stay here. Stay with the weight you already know. At least then, nothing new can surprise you. Nothing new can hurt you. And that's the trap. Sadness becomes safety. Not because it heals us, but because it's familiar. There's another layer to this. It isn't just that sadness feels familiar. It's that our brains are wired to build habits out of emotions, just like they do with actions. Psychologists call this an emotional habit loop. Here's how it works. When we feel something over and over again, the brain recognizes a pattern. And because the brain loves shortcuts, it carves a little pathway that makes it easier to return to that feeling the next time. So if you've been sad often, if your nights have ended in tears more times than you can count, your brain has learned how to find its way back there. Not because it's good for you, but because it's easy. And here's the cruel twist. The brain even rewards this repetition with tiny sparks of dopamine. It's the same mechanism that makes people crave cigarettes or keep scrolling endlessly on their phones. The brain isn't thinking about what's healthy. It's only saying, I know this road. Let's walk it again. So every time you spiral into the same argument or fall into the same thoughts in the middle of the night, you're not weak. You're not broken. You're stuck in a loop your brain has built for you. A loop that feels harder to escape the more you practice it. But habit alone isn't the full story, because sadness doesn't just live inside of us. It's reflected all around us in the culture we consume, in the stories we tell, in the images that go viral late at night. Think about it. How many movies end with heartbreak? How many songs romanticize the person who left? How many TikTok aesthetics celebrate sad girl hours or dark academia, complete with rain, cigarettes, and poetry scribbled in notebooks? Somewhere along the way, sadness became fashionable. It became a kind of badge of authenticity, because when someone is smiling all the time, we might call them fake. But when someone is broken, crying, hurting out loud, we call them real, honest, raw, and our brains notice that. They notice the likes, the comments, the quiet validation. And without realizing it, we start to lean into that identity. We let sadness become not just a feeling, but a performance. I know, because I did it too. My playlists were all melancholic. My feeds were filled with quotes about heartbreak and loneliness. I told myself it was just art, just a phase, just an aesthetic, but really it was my brain finding another shortcut, another way to keep sadness close. And when sadness is everywhere, in our music, in our feeds, in the stories we consume, it doesn't just feel familiar anymore. It feels inevitable. And this is where the real trap begins. Because once sadness is both familiar inside our minds and celebrated outside in our culture, it becomes harder to imagine any other way of living. Think about it. When you've carried sadness long enough, joy starts to feel suspicious, calm feels empty, peace feels like a trick. So when you finally meet someone who treats you kindly, a part of you wonders what's wrong with them. When life is quiet, you start waiting for the storm. When happiness shows up, you brace yourself for how quickly it will leave. And that's how sadness disguises itself as safety. It tells us, stay here. Don't trust the light. Don't risk being disappointed. It's like choosing to sit in a burning house because at least you already know where the flames are. I used to think this made me weak, like I was addicted to pain. But now I see it differently. The truth is, our brains cling to what they know, even if it hurts. And if sadness has been the soundtrack of your life, then joy doesn't just feel strange, it feels dangerous. So we go back again and again, not because we love the suffering, but because we fear the unknown even more. That's the cruelest part of the trap. Sadness feels safer than the very freedom we've been searching for. But here's the good news. A loop isn't a life sentence. Just because your brain has built this pathway doesn't mean you're doomed to walk it forever. Loops can be broken, slowly, patiently, one step at a time. The first step is awareness. When you can see the pattern for what it is, it begins to lose its power. The next time you catch yourself spiraling, pause and whisper, "This is the loop. My brain thinks it's keeping me safe, but I don't have to follow it." Even naming it changes everything. The second step is patience, because you will slip back into old habits. You will feel like you've failed, but that's part of the process. Healing isn't a straight line. It's learning to forgive yourself over and over again until the new path becomes stronger than the old one. And then there's practice, what I call mental hygiene, choosing clarity over comfort, boundaries over fear, reaching for habits that regulate instead of numb. It might be a walk at sunrise, writing down the things you still hope for, letting someone you trust see the parts of you that you usually hide. It will feel uncomfortable at first, almost wrong, because you're teaching your mind a new kind of safety, one that doesn't come from pain. But every time you practice, you carve a new path. And every step makes it easier to believe that sadness isn't the only home you have. But there's something else we need to talk about, because even when you start breaking the loop, even when you begin to choose clarity over comfort, it doesn't immediately feel like relief. In fact, it can feel wrong. Psychologists call this prediction error. Our brains are constantly guessing what will happen next based on the patterns we've repeated the most. So if the old pattern was sadness, the brain expects sadness. When we suddenly give it calm or kindness or joy, the brain doesn't celebrate, it panics. It says, this isn't right. Something's off. That's why healing often feels like losing yourself instead of finding yourself. It's why saying no to someone toxic feels more painful than staying. It's why peace feels empty at first, because the brain hasn't learned how to trust it yet. But here's the truth. That discomfort is not a sign that you're failing. It's a sign that your brain is learning. Every moment you choose the unfamiliar, every time you sit with calm instead of chaos, you are literally rewiring your mind. Healing feels wrong at first, only because sadness has been home for too long. If there's one thing I hope you take away from this, it's that you are not broken for feeling this way. You are not weak for finding sadness easier than joy. You are human, and your brain has been doing its best to protect you, even if it sometimes chose the wrong kind of safety. But safety doesn't have to mean sorrow. It can mean peace. It can mean love. It can mean waking up one morning and realizing that you don't feel as heavy as you once did. I believe that's possible for you, for me, for all of us. So let me ask you, have you ever felt like sadness was safer than happiness? Share your story in the comments, not just for me, but for the people scrolling who might need to hear that they aren't alone. And if you want to keep walking this path with me, hit subscribe. There are more stories, more truths, and more hope waiting here. because none of us were meant to stay trapped in the loop forever.